Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the podcast. This week I have David Meerman Scott, who is a business growth strategist, author of 11 books, of which 3 are bestsellers. I also got a chance to kind of speak to David back in, just over 7 years ago, back in November 2012, at a HubSpot conference where he was talking about content marketing and newsjacking, all that sort of stuff. And as a bit of an aside, we'll dive into how he's got himself into the Oxford English Dictionary on the back of that. But today, we're talking about his kind of new book. But before we get into that, I just want to say, David, hello, welcome back. Nice to speak to you. How are you doing?
Adrian, I'm doing great, my friend. I really appreciate you having me back on. 2 old punks ready to chat, right?
Absolutely. So, David, I'll give you a bit of an intro, but can you give us a bit of an intro on yourself and the work that you do, just for the benefit of our listeners and readers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in the corporate world for about 15 years, was a marketing director at a number of different publicly traded companies. The most recent company I was with was Thomson Reuters, and they sacked me back in 2002, which was the best thing that ever happened to me because that's when I went out on my own. So I've been happily unemployed for 17 years now, and I write books. I deliver speeches all over the world. I've spoken in 46 countries and all 7 continents.
Nice.
And I advise emerging companies around business growth. And my business model is that I don't take cash for my advisory work. I take equity. So I'm kind of like a VC firm. And I've had a number of really successful exits, including HubSpot.
Nice. So before we get into the new book, I want to dig into this thing that you told me before you can started, because I just think that's wild. You told me that you are now in the Oxford English Dictionary. Pray tell, sir. Pray tell.
Yes, and it's kind of remarkable. So the last time we spoke, we were talking about a concept I invented called newsjacking. That's when you follow what's going on in the breaking news cycle. And then if there's a piece of news around something you are an expert in, you create a real-time blog post or video or social media post. And then often you can get quoted in the press or get interest among potential customers. And what I did when I launched this idea of newsjacking is I made it completely available for anyone to talk about. I did not try to trademark it or put copyright around it or do anything to prevent people from making it their own. And today there's other people who wrote books about it. There's people who blog about it. There's people who speak about it. There's people who create conferences around newsjacking. There's hashtags around newsjacking, and that's not me. All of that is other people. And that allowed it to spread way beyond just me. And that's what captured the attention of the editors at the Oxford English Dictionary. And they named it on the short list of Word of the Year a couple of years ago. And the listing in the dictionary actually has my name against it, which is kind of fabulous. Well, and we're about to talk about my new book, Fanocracy, but I'm trying to do the same thing. It's a made-up word, Fanocracy. And while I wrote the book and I did copyright the book, the word Fanocracy is not in any way copyrighted or trademarked. So anyone who wants to can use that word. And I hope they do, because that will spread the idea far and wide.
So I've got a thing, well, pardon the pun, a thing that just kind of came to my head, which is I'm going to augment your title because I think you've created a thing, right? So it's going to be business growth strategist, author of 11 books, of which 3 are bestsellers, and creator of things.
Nice. Creator of things. I'll take that any day.
Fantastic. Sounds like something out of a Marvel Universe kind of film. Creator of things.
Well, it's kind of cool because, you asked me about my background and I was a corporate guy for 15 years. And it's so cool to be able to be a creator and a maker and a doer and a shaker rather than what I was doing before, which is great for many people. Corporate world is wonderful. And I liked my time in the corporate world, but being able to do my own thing now has been remarkable.
Perfect. So actually, you kind of said we're here to talk about your new book, which is hopefully it'll become another thing. It's called Fanocracy, turning fans into customers and customers into fans. So can you tell us about it? Tell us about how it came about, who's it for,
Sure.
and central thesis and all that stuff. And also, you've not actually written it on your own either.
No, I have a co-author, which I'll talk about in just a second. Sure. So about 5 years ago, I was thinking to myself, this whole world that I was partly responsible for creating around digital marketing. One of the books I wrote is called The New Rules of Marketing and PR. It's arguably the best-selling book about digital marketing on the planet. It's done 400,000 copies in English, and it's in 29 other languages. And the ideas in there are totally valid and work for tons of companies, which is why the book has become popular. But many people have begun to abuse that channel, and we see that every day. It's you get put onto an email list, and all of a sudden they're sending you 3 emails a day, and it's hard to get off of it. There's people who are pushing out all kinds of content on social media. They'll connect with you on LinkedIn and then immediately try to sell you something.
Oh, I hate that.
And there's all of the polarization going on in the world. It's in our political environment. In your country, the whole Brexit thing is so polarizing. In my country, it's the Republicans versus the Democrats. They can't work together. It's polarizing. Yeah. And in some cases, with AI and robots online, you don't even know if you might be communicating with a robot. So I realized that while digital marketing still has a use, I think that we really need to swing back. The pendulum has swung too far in the direction of superficial online communications, and people right now are hungry for true human connection. So I was thinking about that 5 years ago, and I started to talk with my daughter, Reiko, about it. She was 21 at the time. And I said to Reiko, I am such a live music geek, it's ridiculous. And she knows this. I've taken her probably to 100 concerts in her life, starting when she was age 6. I took her to the B-52s and the Go-Go's for her first concert when she was 6 years old. And I said, I've been to 700, now my stats, 790 live concerts. I keep a spreadsheet. I've been to 75 Grateful Dead concerts.
You are a total geek.
I'm a total geek. And she said, I know, Daddy, I know you're a music geek, and I'm a Harry Potter geek. And she's not only read every book multiple times, seen every movie multiple times, traveled over to London to go to the studio tour, been to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando several times. She also wrote a 90,000-word alternative ending to the Harry Potter series where Draco Malfoy is a spy for the Order of the Phoenix, and put it on a fan fiction site. And thousands of people have read it. Hundreds of people have commented on it. So what we realized, the two of us, my daughter Reiko and I, is that on one hand, there's digital chaos. And it's harder and harder to break through as a marketer or business owner or someone who wants to grow a business. And then on the other hand, all of us, every single one of us, you, Adrian, and me, and my daughter Reiko, all of us have things that we're passionate about.
Sure.
Whether it's Harry Potter or punk rock or the Grateful Dead or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so we decided to collaborate, this was 5 years ago, on what has become a book called Fanocracy, How to Turn Fans into Customers and Customers into Fans. And we researched how and why people become fans of something.
Right. And
then how can a company actually tap into that kind of fandom to grow business? And it's been a fabulous adventure. And having my daughter involved has been unbelievably powerful for this book because, I'm a 50-something white guy. My daughter, Reiko, is a millennial. She's 26. She's obviously a woman, so different gender. She is mixed race, and she also is a scientist. She did a neuroscience background, and she's currently in her final year of medical school.
Nice.
So we're completely different people, but we collaborated on this book to make sure that different generations and so on are represented in it.
Cool. So can I just ask, though, because it's like a lot of people will... you know how some people are, they'll see something and just go, oh, that's a thing to do to help me do this thing. Like they'll see Fanocracy and turning fans into, or customers into fans. And it's like, oh, it's all about advocacy. It's all about referrals. It's all about that because they see things from their own sort of perspective.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
Is it just about making customers fans of your products and services, or is it broader than that?
I think if I were to boil it down to a sentence, what it's really about is creating a true human connection, a true human connection. And there's lots and lots and lots of different manifestations of that. In your world, you talk a lot about user experience and things like that. And so there's, how can you build a more human connection into that? Sure. How can you build a more human connection into the way that you communicate on social networks? How can you build a more human connection in the way that you try to sell and service customers? So I think it's the broadest topic I've ever written about because it has elements of sales, of marketing, of customer service, and it also, interestingly, has a very important component about us as people, because what we learned is that the more things that we are passionate about, whether that's, in your case, punk rock, in my case, the Grateful Dead, in my daughter's case, Harry Potter, when we're passionate about something in our private life, that makes us a more interesting person to do business with. Wow. Your new book is so interesting because you come at it from a perspective of your passion. So it's not just a dissertation on user experience and so on. It's I'm a huge passionate fan of punk rock, and I see in that passion a way that we can use some of those ideas to look at an aspect of business. Yeah. And so our book, Fanocracy, looks at passion and the neuroscience around human connection, and then creates ideas for how that can be applied in multiple ways to the world of business.
Perfect. I think it's really exciting because I wanted to ask that question because it's not. I wanted to dispel this idea that it's just about advocacy and referrals, and it's not just a business sort of thing. There's commentary around there and lessons there for kind of a broader piece, and it's not just about commercial organizations. It can be applied to all sorts of organizations, all sorts of collectives.
It can. And we have examples from all kinds of different worlds. So there's some commercials, but there's also, there's nonprofits that we talk about. There's doctors and lawyers and dentists that we use as examples. So there's all kinds of different ways to apply it. So
in the early part of the book, you described a situation with a hosting company. You talked about kind of like, you were likely to lose all of your data. Now,
I laugh about it now.
Yeah, well, exactly. You're kind of like dragging your fingernails across the desk, sort of thing, in the memory of it. But to give us a sense of, because can you explain what happened?
Sure.
And also
exactly.
and also about kind of how that illustrates one of the most important kind of like points, because I think it's a great story. It's a very personal story as well.
It is. So I have multiple URLs. I probably have, 20 or 30 URLs, and some of them are just parked because I think they're interesting URLs. Others of them I use, like newsjacking, for example, or davidmeermanscott.com, for example. And so one of my URLs, I had put into a hosting company, and when I first had that hosting company set me up, for some reason they checked in their setup process a box that they shouldn't have checked.
Right.
Essentially, to make a very long story short, what they did was they checked the box that said this is a free account.
Right.
And that was because I had done other types of business with that company, and they made the hosting aspect free, even though I paid them for other stuff. Well, it turns out that 2 years later, when this free account was up for renewal, it had to go to a paid account. Right. And when they make the transition from free to paid, it meant that all of the data in that account was going to disappear. In other words, my entire website was going to disappear. And so I couldn't figure out how to fix this by going online and poking around and seeing what I could do. You know, I tried to enter my credit cards. There's all sorts of stuff I tried to do. Nothing worked. So I called them up. Their helpline, and they answered the phone pretty quickly, and I got a rep on the line, and I explained the situation. They said, "Oh, I've never heard of that. Let me check it. Let me put you on a brief hold." So the brief hold was 10 minutes, and then they came back and they said, "I'm very sorry, I can't fix this. I have to escalate you to the next tier of support, and someone will get back to you." And then someone would get back to me, and I had to repeat again from the beginning exactly what was going on. And then that person said, "Oh my gosh, I can't help you either. I have to send you to someone else." And then I had to repeat it again. And then, "Oh, I'll have to call you back tomorrow because I don't know how to fix that. We have to go to the developers." I mean, this went on and on and on for 2 weeks. And the deadline was looming for when my website would disappear and all the data would disappear. In other words, the website would go away. And so what I recognized here is the idiocy of this particular company and many, many, many companies, that they didn't assign me one individual, one human being to see the problem through. Right. Every time somebody contacted me, it was a brand new problem to them. And they had to research and understand what was going on. And so that's just not a good way to build fans for your business. A much better approach is, okay, well, this is clearly a problem we need to solve. Let's give it to one person, and then they can figure out within the organization how to fix it, and that one person can get back to me. I probably spent, 10 hours on this problem, and it was eventually solved, but it doesn't make me want to do business with this company ever again.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they prioritize process over relationships.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly right. And they're clearly trying to squeeze every penny out of the process of supporting customers, and they do what they think is the most efficient. But in the end, it makes people like me scream and then leave them, and then they have to find new customers to bring them in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that I think you're touching on a point around people can try and do all these different things, and then we get into the point where we want to automate stuff and we improve efficiency and accelerate kind of things. But we almost lose sight of the relationship in the process.
It's not building a human connection, because every single person I talked with was a brand new person. I never had a chance to develop a relationship. I'd like to contrast that with another organization that I wrote about very early in the book. It's called Haggerty Insurance. So when I open my presentations, my live presentations, I ask a simple question. I do this before I even say good morning or thank you to the organizers. They say, "Here's David Meerman Scott." And I go on the stage, I look at the audience, and I say, "Who loves to buy car insurance?" And then it's dead silence, and sometimes a few people sort of giggle. And I said, "Nobody likes to buy auto insurance. It's terrible. You hate to pull out your credit card or write a check for auto insurance. And then you hate even more if you have to use the product, because it means you crashed your car. It's terrible." And I said, I asked one person about auto insurance, and he said, "Auto insurance sucks. Everybody hates auto insurance." And that was McKeel Haggerty. He's the CEO of a car insurance company.
Right.
And he said, "David, everyone hates my business. Everyone hates my business. So I can't market my business in the same way that everybody else does. I had to go out and develop true human connections with my customers and turn them into fans." And that's exactly what he did. They actually insure classic cars, Haggerty Insurance. And they go to over 100 classic car shows a year. They set up a booth at the classic car shows, and they provide education. They provide people with valuable information. They have an enormous database, bigger than any other database, I believe, on the planet, for what classic cars are worth.
Right.
And all of this is building fans. They have a magazine that goes out 6 times a year. They have a really great YouTube channel that has something like 1 million subscribers. Can you imagine an auto insurance company with 1 million subscribers to its YouTube channel?
Yeah.
They have the Haggerty Drivers Club that has 650,000 members. And all of this drives fans of Haggerty Insurance, an insurance company in a business everyone hates.
Yeah.
And so they've ended up now becoming the fastest growing auto insurance company, I believe, in the world, but certainly in North America. They're going to grow by 200,000 customers this year. And what McKeel Haggerty told me when I spoke with him, he said, I didn't have to invent the car. I didn't have to create the passion for cars, but all I had to do was tie my business to that passion, and I can grow as a result. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, that is a fanocracy. It's that genuine human connection. It's powering this passion that people have for things, unlike what that hosting company did, which is sort of shuttle me around from one person to another and not treat me like a human being. Yeah. Now when I get my bill, which I actually got last week from Haggerty Insurance, I'm excited to pay it. I don't mind pulling out my checkbook and paying that bill every year, because I love Haggerty and I'm a fan of what they do.
But then that also implies you have a classic car, David.
I have, believe it or not, which are rare in my country, not in yours, a 1973 Land Rover Series 3.
Oh, is it short wheelbase or long wheelbase?
It is a short. It's an 88. And
that's a shorty.
Yeah, and I love it. And they're very rare here. You very rarely see. They only imported like 4,000 or 5,000 of them,
right?
And they only opened up the market to North America for the series vehicles for about 3 years.
Nice.
So they look really cool. And I live in Massachusetts, although they're much more common where you are.
Yeah. So actually, as you go into the book, you actually start to talk about the sort of 9 different steps to build your fanocracy. I mean, and that now. Could you tell us a little bit about that and tell me briefly about what the steps are? Because I'd like to dig into a couple of them.
Sure. Yeah. Why don't we? Yeah, I'll let you know what the 9 are, and then we could pick a few to jump into. So, first one is get closer than usual. Simply, how can you get physically or virtually closer to your customers or potential customers? Let go of your creations. Essentially, this idea is that once you put your product or service out into the world, it's no longer yours. You should let your fans use that product or service and talk about it in any way they see fit and not try to control that.
Okay.
Give more than you have to is the concept of giving things away for free. And this actually came about because of my love of the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead were the only band that allowed its fans to record their concerts. You could bring in professional level recording gear to record concerts. Wow. And that allowed people to share initially in the old days with cassette tapes and now with MP3 files, which grow the huge, huge fan base that the Grateful Dead has today. Mm-hmm. The next one is build identity to become more than the product. So the idea here is that you have to recognize that your customers sometimes have an identity around that product or service that you're offering, and that many of us experience a coming of age around the things that we love. And that may be the case in your situation of the love of punk rock. It certainly is in my case in the love of live music, that I did those activities first when I was reaching puberty, when I was a teenager, and that became really important to me going forward. The next idea, be smart about your influencers. So there's this whole superficial influencer marketing trend going on now in the world. You know, somebody like Kim Kardashian, for example, you can pay to put a post on Instagram for, or people just trying to get anybody to talk about their stuff, or, you know, paying people to talk about their stuff. But the best influencers are the people who truly love your product and talk about it because they want to, not because they're paid or coerced.
Sure.
Then we've got break down barriers. And the concept here is, how can you make your customers truly a part of your organization in an interesting way? Not just sell them a product or service, but let them to go behind the curtain. Let them learn something about you that's surprising. And we have some cool examples there. For example, there's a restaurant that has one table actually in the kitchen. Right. And so I ate there with my family, and it's amazing. It's a restaurant in Boston where you go in, the table is in the kitchen, the chef comes and tells you what's going on, and you watch all the activity happen. Wow. Listen to rehumanize. This is about truly understanding the stories behind your customers. And this really comes at it from the perspective of my daughter, who's loves the concept of narrative medicine. And she's not only studying it, but now teaches it. She's last year of medical school now, and she teaches a course at Boston University on narrative medicine. That's the concept of understanding the entire patient and their life story, not just the symptoms of their disease, because that informs a much better understanding of how potentially to treat that disease. And the same thing we believe to be true of all businesses. As you understand more about your customers, either them as individuals or collectively, and understand the narrative of who they are, it's way more interesting than to be able to sell and market to them than if you're just looking simply at the product and service itself. Tell the truth, especially when it hurts. Yeah. This is the concept of ta-da, drum roll please, telling the truth always. And it's remarkable how many companies don't. Oh, dude. And one of our favorite examples of a company that did tell the truth was, you may remember last year when KFC in the UK ran out of chicken.
I love the campaigns that went with that afterwards.
And they did a fabulous job, because it wasn't their fault. It was their logistics company that screwed up the chicken deliveries. And rather than what most companies would do is say, hey, we ran out of chicken, it's not our fault, we'll fix it. They owned the problem, and they did it in a humorous way, and they built more fans as a result.
Absolutely.
And the next concept is develop employees who are fans. So the idea here is that if your employees are passionate as part of their life, then they're much more likely to create passion for your business. So actually hiring people who have passion is real good business. And then it's not one of the 9, but we finished the book with the concept of a passionate life, and how if you live a life with passion and you're eager to do the things that you love with the people that you love, you live a better life. And that actually makes you a better business person as a result.
Absolutely. So I want to go and actually dive into it,
Sure.
to some of these. So the one because just to give people a flavor of the book, because I guess we could talk about all this for ages, because there's so many examples in the book. But the first one I want to ask about was this idea of let go of your creations, and particularly the Adobe story about language and trademarks and stuff. Because I just thought, I read that, I was like, what?
What are you talking about? Sure. So we recognized that there are a lot of companies out there that try to control the way people use their products and services, and also try to control the way that people talk about their products or services or companies. And one of those companies that does try to control is Adobe. And my daughter Reiko, who wrote this particular chapter, incidentally, we just some backstory on the writing process.
Sure.
We initially wrote the book as a single unified voice between the two of us. And we actually wrote almost the whole book that way. And we recognized it wasn't working. So we ended up, each of us writing different chapters. So we actually name which chapter we wrote. And it's way better that way because my personality and my daughter's personality had come through. So she wrote this chapter, Let Go of Your Creations. And she tells the story about how she loves to make fan art. She loves to make art using Adobe Photoshop software. Right. And she loves this so much that she's on a bunch of different forums and chat rooms, and she looks at YouTube videos that people make. And Adobe actively discourages individual artists from even buying their products and services and talking about the products and services in the ways that they want to, because they're so focused on the corporate market, and that's what they think they need to focus on. Right. So they actually say you cannot say that you photoshopped something. They say you must say that you manipulated an image using Adobe, trademark R, Photoshop, trademark R, software.
Oh my word.
And my daughter said, that she and her friends who love to make stuff using Photoshop laugh because everything that Adobe wants them to say sounds like a robot. Yeah. And everything the way they're talking about it sounds like a fan of Adobe. So they're actively discouraging their fans from talking about them. Yeah. And I would contrast that with the ways that some other organizations are celebrating when their fans talk about their products and services in the ways that they want to. A couple of examples. So there's these cool robotic vacuum cleaners. One of them is made by a company called iRobot. And the vacuum cleaner is called the Roomba. And it basically cruises around your living room floor automatically and does the vacuuming for you. And so there's a whole bunch of people who have created YouTube videos of their pets, their dogs and their cats, hitching rides on the Roomba vacuum cleaner. And they're hysterical. And they put them onto YouTube. And they have millions of views of these videos. Now, iRobot, the company, could have said, this is an incorrect use of our product and you must remove these videos. But they didn't. They left them up. They said, this is cool. People love our products and that's an awesome thing. Yeah. Another example is Microsoft. They have a worldwide partner community, and they have an online community of their partners. And that's where partners can ask questions. And the partners themselves answer the questions, not Microsoft. Right. And the partner channel actually represents $95 billion in revenue. It's by far the largest channel of revenue at Microsoft. And Microsoft just became the most valuable company in the world. And many people gave them up 10 years ago, and they didn't think that they were going to survive in the way that they were growing. And now they have grown hugely. And I think it's partly because they allow their customers, in this case their partners, to communicate in any way they want. And Katie Quigley at Microsoft told us that people don't want to hear from us. Our partners don't want to hear from us. They want to hear from their peers. Yeah. And it's better for us to let the peers talk to the peers than us try to heavy-handedly tell people what to do. Sure.
Perfect. I mean, I thought it was great. I mean, it just, that the terminology that you kind of used around the sort of the Adobe, how Adobe wanted Reiko to kind of to describe kind of like their use of kind of the Adobe software. I mean, it just feels like it feels like it's gone through a whole bunch of brand and then also legal committees. Yes. Kind of like again and again and again. And you look at it and just go, that is so, I mean, like, what world are you living in?
Exactly. And, getting back to our initial discussions, I mentioned that if I were to boil the book down to one sentence, it's how can you make more personal connections? Sure. to your
absolutely.
customers. And every one of the chapters has something to do with creating a more personal connection with your customers. And ultimately, that's great business.
Absolutely. And that leads me on to the next one I wanted to ask you about, was this idea about the one of the steps, which talks about breaking down barriers, particularly because you have a story in there about grain surfboards and also about Glenmorangie whiskey, because given I'm Scottish, anything that alludes to kind of like whiskey and things, I'm thinking I'm all over that.
Anything that alludes to whiskey is great.
So tell me about that story.
Sure. So Grain Surfboards makes wooden surfboards out of a small factory in York, Maine, which, by the way, is very cold. It's like surfing in Scotland.
Yeah.
And so I'm a surfer, love to surf, and the typical surfboard is made out of foam. It's not good for the environment. And so I was kind of poking around in one of my surfing magazines about 4 or 5 years ago, and I ran across an article about wooden surfboards. Like, wooden surfboards, that's really cool. The original surfboards from over 100 years ago out of Hawaii were made out of wood, but they were essentially a huge plank, fabulously heavy and unwieldy, and you would never want to ride one today. Yeah. But this company, in York, Maine, Grain Surfboards, created a surfboard using a boat building technique that actually has ribs and it's hollow on the inside.
Right.
And so this ended up making a light and maneuverable board similar to a foam board that's actually really beautiful. So I was on their site and I was thinking about maybe buying one of these boards, and they're expensive. They're twice as much money typically as a foam board. So something like $2,000 for a surfboard.
Okay.
And so I almost bought one, but then I saw that you can actually go to their factory and you can build your own surfboard together with the people at Grain Surfboards who will help you. And I thought, that is awesome. Yeah. So I signed up, went up to York, Maine, spent 4 days up there, and start to finish, I built a beautiful, beautiful surfboard. And the idea of breaking down barriers, which is one of these 9 ideas, was so powerful at Grain Surfboards, because what they did was they not only shared their secret proprietary model for making a light and maneuverable wooden surfboard, which no one had ever really done before. They shared that. Anyone can copy it. And they let you actually in there so you can see exactly how they do it. They're breaking down the barriers. And then because I was with them for 4 days, I got to know the owner and the other people who work there pretty well. You know, we ate breakfast every morning. We ate lunch. We'd have a beer after we finished. We'd sometimes, if the surf was up, we'd go out and go surfing. And I loved it so much, I actually I went and did a second board.
Wow.
And so this concept of breaking down barriers is really important. Oh, and then the whiskey. So please, I would like you to pronounce the name of that particular
Glenmorangie.
Thank you, Glenmorangie, because there's different ways that people say it.
Yeah, there's Glenmorangie.
And many Americans say Glenmorgangie or something like that, which I didn't want to embarrass myself and say it wrong. But anyway, what they did is they have a partnership with them, and they use recycled wood from whiskey barrels, and they have a special edition board that you can buy as well, which is really cool because again, I mentioned earlier that the traditional foam surfboards are very bad for the environment because they're not good to make. You have to transport them from one place to another, and then when the board breaks, it's a big fat chunk of foam that has to go into a landfill.
Sure.
Whereas if you're using recycled wood, and then it's all natural, and then if the surfboard reaches the end of its life, it's wood, it can be burned.
Yeah. Awesome. So wanted to ask you about kind of one last one very quickly, because you alluded to something about narrative medicine. And I thought that's really, really interesting. And particularly around this idea, so that one of the step I wanted to ask you about was listen to dehumanize.
Yes.
But that I wanted to understand a bit more about that and how it connects to narrative medicine and what we can learn from that, because it's just super, super interesting.
Very, very interesting stuff. So the idea of narrative medicine came out of Columbia University, which is where my daughter did her neuroscience degree.
Right.
And she loved the idea of narrative medicine so much, she dug into it, and now she teaches a course on it. And basically the idea is that you need to understand the entire patient's story, not just their symptoms. And she shares in the book the story of a patient that she uses the pseudonym of Jeremy for. Jeremy is an older gentleman. He had a blood disease, and he was nearing the end of his life. And my daughter Reiko and he spoke for more than an hour. And she learned that he's an artist, an amateur artist.
Right.
And that's the most important thing for him at this stage in his life. And he specifically said, as long as I can do my art, I want to remain alive.
Yeah.
But if I can no longer do my art, I'm ready to die.
Right.
And that's not a way that a traditional doctor would think.
Sure.
Because it's all about keeping people alive, even if they're bedridden and can't do what they love to do. Mm-hmm. And that's when the light bulb went off in my daughter's head that the patient's story is really, really important, in many cases more important than the symptoms that they present with. So they were able to come up with a different form of treatment for Jeremy than they would have otherwise, just based on the symptoms. And we recognize that the same ideas can apply for all kinds of businesses. Yeah. Understanding the individual as well as the collective group of people is really important. And we have an example in there from Siri Lindley. She was a former world #1 triathlon champion, and now she's a coach. Yeah. And she told us that every other triathlon coach focuses on the numbers and the statistics, especially the stats that come off of the smartwatches. Yeah. and the so-called power meters that are connected to the bikes. And she said that if you only focus on the data, which is equivalent of focusing on the patient's symptoms, if you only focus on the data, you're not necessarily going to become a world-class triathlete. You have to dig in and find your passion for being a triathlete. And she coaches her athletes around the full passion they have for the sport, rather than the numbers and the statistics. And she's incredibly successful as a result of that, doing it in a very different way. And we just feel, this is just one of the 9 concepts in the book, but we feel like this idea of understanding the person, understanding their passions, understanding your customers deeply is going to yield better results than just focusing on the data and the statistics that most companies focus on.
Yeah, there's I collect quotes that I have a bit of a swipe file which have got all these quotes that I collect that I come across, and one of my favorites is from a linguistic scholar called Joseph. I think his name is Krzyzewski. He's a Polish American linguistic scholar, and the quote was, "The map is not the territory."
Oh wow, cool. Yeah, and that is definitive of this concept of to rehumanize.
I thought you would kind of like that one.
It's great. Right. Your symptoms are not representative of what's making you sick.
Sure, absolutely, brilliant. So, just thinking about kind of this whole sort of thing, kind of, David, because it's like there's some really, really super interesting ideas. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the idea of developing more of a human connection.
Yes.
And how that kind of can sustain us and sustain business and make the whole experience, both as a customer and also as an employee, kind of better. If I was to say to you, if people are listening into this, a lot of people like simple things and want to know where to start, as it were. I mean, if I was to say to you, what would be the one thing you would do, people should do or should consider doing to start building a more human connection in their business, where would you kind of advise them to go and start?
So something that any one of us can do right away now, like literally today, is something that so few companies do, and that is take a look at your website. and look at the words and look at the images. When you look at the words, you need to figure out how you can eliminate what I call gobbledygook language, which is this made-up superlative kind of stuff.
A bit like the Adobe language.
Yeah, like for example, technology company might say we're the flexible, scalable solution for improving business process using cutting-edge technology and mission-critical applications. And you use language like that, it makes absolutely no sense. It turns people off.
Sure.
Write in a way that your mother would understand.
Yeah.
And the second thing around images is that so many organizations use stock photographs to represent people. They use stock photographs out of a catalog to represent their customers or represent their employees or represent their partners. I highly recommend that you use real photographs of real people and put those photographs of real people, your customers, your partners, and others on your website. And those two things you can do today, and they can go a long way to build the human connections that will be incredibly powerful for you in the future. And so there's lots and lots of other things that we talk about in the book that you can do over time. But something you can do right now today is think about how you're presenting yourself to the outside world.
Awesome. So anything else that you'd like to add that we've missed out before I ask you my two final questions, which is my kind of like punk questions, my ongoing piece of research?
Nothing that you didn't ask, but I would like to add that when we talk about this idea, we call it a fanocracy, made-up word. When we talk about the idea of fandom and growing fans, people instantly think, oh, that's just for sports stars and entertainers. But as we dug in for 5 years of this research, what we recognized is that the idea of growing fans is for all of us, every single one of us. It's not just for athletes and entertainers anymore.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Right. So, and that sounds like a bit of a challenge as well. Let's think about, what does a fan mean to your business, which is cool. So, like I said, punk questions. We were talking before. I recently published a new book called Punk CX.
Yep.
And
cool.
Thank you. What I've been doing, I've been asking people on these interviews for two things. First one is like, what one word do you think would describe a punk approach to customer experience?
I would say passion.
Awesome.
Passion. No question about it in my mind.
Awesome. And the second one is, what company or brand do you think epitomizes a punk approach to customer experience, and why?
So we actually wrote about this particular company in our book. The company's name is MeUndies. MeUndies is an underwear company, believe it or not. And they're totally punk. People don't like buying underwear, but they love MeUndies. They've got a slogan, 10 million happy butts and going strong, which is so cool. And around their experience, they do subscription underwear. You can actually get every month or every 3 months a pair of underwear sent to you. And you can actually choose which pair you want that week, that month or that quarter. And in some cases, they're limited editions that are only available to people who subscribe. And they've come up with really cool ways for people to share. They do his and her underwear. So the same pattern is available in both male and female versions. And so people who are in a relationship can both have the same pattern. Or groups of friends can share the same pattern. And they're growing fabulously well as a result in a category of product that people don't really give any thought to. They're totally punk.
I think that's kind of like, that's great, because I'm thinking about that and I'm thinking, I love the concept, I love the name, the MeUndies, but I'm thinking about underwear on subscription and everything else. And then I'm going to get a bit like, well, maybe not. But that's the thing.
They're totally punk.
Yeah, they're like going. They're
fabulous.
doing it. They're like going. It might not be for you, but that's okay. That's cool.
Correct.
So I don't care. We're going to go off and do it.
That's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. I love them. I love them. I can't wait to get my new package every month. My wife thinks it's ridiculous. So that's kind of cool, right?
No, it's brilliant. It's absolutely on the money in terms of like we're doing it for these people over here, and you might not like it, but we don't care because we're doing it for those people over there. That's
correct.
Fine. David, that's brilliant. Thank you. MeUndies. What a story. So tell me, Fanocracy is coming out this interview will get released in January, so it's coming out this month. Where can people find it? Where can we find out more?
As far as I know from our publishers, it's being published in the UK simultaneously as the US. Yeah. Available in hardcover and ebook, and Reiko and I read ourselves the audiobook version.
Nice.
And should be available. It's Penguin Random House, so should be available most anywhere. Okay. Really, really excited about it. And Adrian, I really appreciate you having us on. If anyone wants to learn a little bit more, it's fanocracy.com. We've got a site with all sorts of free and interesting information and some examples of the stories that we've already shared today. If anyone wants to reach me on the socials, I am DM Scott, DMSCOTT.
Perfect, David. I will make sure we get all that written up and linked up, and when the interview goes live, and the show notes and the highlights and things. Just want to say, first of all, congratulations on the book project with not just to you but also to your daughter.
Thank you.
It's a great job, fantastic stories. I love the idea about creating more of a human connection. But lastly, just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time with us today. That's been awesome.
Oh, my pleasure, Adrian, and thank you very much for having it on, and thank you for doing Punk CX too.
You're welcome. Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as we say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.